Ladies and gentlemen, Skip Lievsay.
Thank you.
Let's unpack that. Oh, okay.
That's okay. Wing it.
That Roma scene, because there's so much. I think we were joking before. This is now like the fourth or fifth time that we talked about this movie, but there's so much in that scene that I think is indicative of Alfonso's, like his desires and his approach to recreating the Mexico City of his youth in these long shots and very, very complicated sound work that is kind of way more detailed and complex than you sort of notice the first time you listen to the track. So talk to us a little bit about what's happening in that sequence and the extraordinary amount of work that went into it.
Well, it's true that Alfonso was sort of hell-bent on recreating the environment as he remembered it from his childhood. One of the kids in the movie represents Alfonso, the middle boy. Most people think it's the little boy, but it's the middle boy. And the events that are depicted in the film are largely true and happened to Alfonso, although some of the things are a little bit out of order chronologically and were moved about to make the movie sort of fit together better. Everything is pretty darn accurate. Some stuff is crazily, stupidly accurate, like this scene here, which was... You may be aware that street scene was recreated. We'll get to that later, but most of that street has been destroyed in earthquakes and renovated and replaced with new structures, and of course all the vehicles and stuff, those are period cars. And so Alfonso had this idea, I think. Glenn and I we weren't wise enough to ask him these questions ourselves directly, but we believe, us working on the film and Glenn, that he was kind of obsessed with getting as much of his memory into the movie in hopes that people could get closer to his own childhood and the way things actually happened to him. And he had a hope and a belief that if we had this really extreme accuracy and really, really detailed, vividly detailed audio soundscape, that the audience would have an opportunity to maybe step into the environments and enjoy the film from within rather than standing on the doorway looking inside the proscenium of the movie. So because of Atmos, we were able to do a trick where we made a sound stage that completely envelops the audience throughout the film. And Alfonso drove us. There's no way to say it nicely. So anyway, he drove us really hard to make that environment really fun and inclusive and crazily detailed. Like, for instance, all the people that Cleo, the main character, passes by in that scene, all had recorded dialogue, which was written by Alfonso. Every single person has lines. They all meant something. They all said something that was pertinent to the scene and the location and the environment. And all of those had to be placed in the Atmos environment and panned and et cetera. So everything in the movie, they all had footsteps, of course, as well. Everything became like an exercise on top of an exercise, basically. A hat on a hat, as we like to say.
Tell me about the Loop Group for this film.
Well, there was a lot of ADR that was recorded periodically during the 6 months work that happened before I started working on the movie about a year ago. And so prior to my coming on, there was a lot of ADR recorded. But there was this mythic group session that was meant to happen. And so as we were mixing the film, the session happened in Mexico City. And some of my workers from here went down to Mexico City and helped out. And over a 10-day period, they recorded these lines throughout the film using over 300 actors came in. and they recorded an absolute mountain of material that then had to be sorted and then, of course, put in the film as well. It got to be so detailed that we actually used cue sheets for the first time in a long time, but they were sort of unusual, and they were generated by the visual effects people. They had already made rotoscope outlines around most of the characters in most of the scenes in the movie, so they were able to color code outlines around all the people in the frame so that we could identify, oh yeah, the pink outline is that line there, so that belongs with him, so we need to pan that over there, etc. So we had these cue sheets, which were screenshots with outlines of the characters on them. I wish I had some of those, but anyway.
And it wasn't any easier because, of course, you don't speak Spanish. So
yeah, I don't speak. I'm embarrassed to admit I don't speak Spanish, and so everything that we were talking about was in Spanish. So I had to just do my best and try to stay with it. And of course, Alfonso made fun of that all the time, but and rightly so. I mean, it's ridiculous. This is my third film with him, and I don't speak. I understand what he's saying when he's talking to someone else berating me. I know exactly. I got that down. He never did that, of course, but
no, there are never any tense moments with the director on a mixing stage. We don't have any idea what that's about. And the final mix. Tell us about the final mix and how you know. I think we've all worked with directors who, you know, at one end of the extreme, you've got Clint Eastwood, who will show up for.
Let's not overthink this, guys.
Yeah. At one end of the extreme, you got Clint Eastwood, who will show up for a playback, but doesn't want to be on the mixing stage while you're actually doing anything to, you know. So you listen to a playback, he gives you some notes, he leaves, he comes back a couple days later. And then you've got directors. I remember the first time that we worked with Darren Aronofsky at Skywalker, we realized that we couldn't actually pre-dub simultaneously on two stages because Darren actually had to be in the room while all the Foley pre-dubs were happening. So given those two extremes, where is Alfonso kind of, how is he in the mix? How involved is he? What's your relationship with him during that time?
well, he's very involved, and in this case, he was very involved times 10 because there was a lot of information that we didn't understand. He couldn't relate it because it came out of his memory. So a lot of things. It was almost like we were mixing smells and music and things because he had to explain things that happened and why they were important to him and how they impacted the audio of his childhood, and we could somehow please put that into the movie. Now go ahead. So the form that took was Craig Hennigan mixed effects, and I mixed dialogue and the little bit of music that there is in the film. All source music. Craig and I made a mix, as we always do. We took our material, we had sort of had pre-dubs, and we made a mix of the scenes, basically by scene. And Alfonso would come in and we'd play back, and he would say, "Very nice." And sometimes it was not as nice as that. It'd be like, "That's horrible." Okay, all right. Thank you for showing me that sad stuff. Let's go back to the beginning. That was a bad day. But the good day was like, smile, okay, wow, I see you, okay, cool. But still, we would go back to the beginning, and we'd look through all the material, everything, and question everything's value, importance, placement, volume, reverb, connection with other material, and of course the localization, particularly the main characters, all their dialogue, they all had Foley, of course, and wherever they went in the room, we had to match the audio to that, including offstage into the back. And I apologize for some people who were distracted by that, but we found that many times in the film, basically the film was shot with maybe with this in mind, or a fantastic mistake was made because the camera is very slow moving or sometimes not moving at all. So we were able to conduct these experiments in a way that people could really latch onto, even people who are distracted by a lot of moving dialogue, which they're used to hearing coming out of the center. But because the camera was very sort of methodical, we could be very methodical with the soundtrack. And we felt there was kind of a tipping point where it just seems real. It just seems like, oh, okay, well, this is a kind of a weird movie, but now I'm with it, I get it, it's not distracting anymore, okay, good. And for many people that worked. So when there's sometimes where the camera is moving and there is things that are sounding here and then the next frame they're sounding back in the back of the room, and that is quite distracting always. And we're like, what should we do now? So we moved some of the edits, some of the picture edits, so that the exchanges would be at least not in the middle of a word, and that helped. But we found that basically if we broke this sort of wall that we created by making everything move all the time, that we would have to re-engage the audience, and that took a while. And the audience would have to re-enter the room and re-sit down and re-get comfortable with everything, rather than simply be distracted by one phrase, okay, that was distracting, what should we do now? Anyway, that was our thing. That lasted for 8 weeks in England, 7 days a week, 12 hours a day. I think we had 2 days off. And we ran out of gas.
That was the final mix.
That was the final. We ran out of gas, and Craig and I had to go back to America and conduct our business and get our families back in track. And we had 2 more weeks in Los Angeles. So it was, as Glenn pointed out one time doing a Q&A, he said, so that's like, that would be 10 weeks, and that's 70 days. So what, Glenn asked me, is a 70-day mix? What does that look like? And, okay, so that's like a normal movie times 3, basically. If you don't also add in the 7 days a week, 12 hours a day part. And it's really hard. But we couldn't do what we wanted to do in less time than that. And that's just what it took. Sorry to say.
I've heard the movie now several times, both the first time I heard it in 7.1 at Telluride Film Festival, and then I've gotten to hear it several times at Atmos, and it's the most astonishingly detailed Atmos mix and the most engaged use of spatialization that I've ever experienced. So when, we did this discussion with Alfonso in Los Angeles in December, and Alfonso, I discovered during Q&As or panel discussions is just he's a maddening master, because there were a couple questions I really wanted him to address, and I asked them, and he didn't answer those questions. He answered other questions that he wanted to answer. But so now that I have you, you've touched on this, which is the use of dialogue in the film, and I feel like you guys started this experimentation with Gravity, which was the first time that you had worked together in Atmos. But Gravity, as we saw in that first clip, you had a lot of visual cues to spin dialogue around the room. And obviously, I'm old enough and been in the business long enough to have been taught you never take dialogue out of the center channel. But you guys broke that rule, and that seemed like a little bit of an experiment that you then went several steps farther with on Roma. And I'm curious about, was that always part of Alfonso's conception for this film, or was that something that you guys sort of experimented with and found in the mix?
The 3 questions that we always wanted to ask Alfonso, I'm sure he would, as you say, he would not have answered them directly, are why was it shot in black and white? How come there's no music? And whose idea was it to pan everything? And those, unfortunately, we didn't ask Alfonso, and he probably would not have answered anyway. But yes, he really attacked the idea in depth on Children of Men with Richard Beggs. So he was already into it. I think he also did it on his Harry Potter, Prisoner of Azkaban, I think. Anyway,
he's just not afraid to do that.
Well, he's a bit of a contrarian, or a lot of a contrarian, worse than me. He's really into breaking stuff, so he's, as you can see in Gravity, everything gets broken, basically. He's wonderfully involved in the scientific aspect of making movies, and Gravity was a perfect playground for him and Chivo Lubeski, who shot the film. And they did a lot of big experiments, and the moving dialogue, I think he had always wanted to do that, and Gravity is such an extreme possibility. I mean, everything's moving in most of the film, and the moving dialogue in Gravity was fantastic because it enabled people to kind of ID geographically where they were and where people were, because they were really mainly George and Sandra were the two characters in most of the movie, and so you had a male and a female voice, and where one was playing, you could go, well, Sandra's not in the frame, but now I hear her voice back there, so she's back there, and it kind of gave a sort of grounding aspect to the narrative, but it also, for many people, was really disorienting, so it heightened the feeling that you're completely helplessly lost in space. And I think that may have informed the way he shot Roma, to give an anchor, to give the audience the anchor of the kind of box, so that things could happen within the box. And I think if I had to guess, I would say that's why Roma is the way it is.
Since you brought it up, there's no score in Roma. There's some diegetic music, some of which we heard in that street scene. And you've had some experience with this before. I think it's for every sound supervisor, sound designer, it's kind of a dream not to have musical score to thwart the beauty of your sound design. I'm not anti-music at all, but I've teased Skip about this before. But so you also had this experience on No Country for Old Men, which I thought had no musical score in it whatsoever. Turns out it does sneakily have some stuff woven in there. Carter Burwell corrected me on that when we had that conversation. But from a narrative storytelling standpoint, what does it do in a movie like No Country for Old Men, and what does it do in a movie like Roma to not have a symphonic or a traditional score, and what pressure does that put on you as the sound designer to kind of step in and do some of those sort of emotional chores that we would normally associate with music?
I mix dialogue and music, so I'm sort of deeply involved with music on most films, and I play an instrument. I'm not a musician, but I play guitar and little piano. And I'm a big fan of many types of music, and I really do enjoy film music to a great degree. There is a unhappy aspect of my job where we have competing forces on the music side and on the effects side, like that Danny Boy sequence, for instance. And only the wisest filmmakers know what to do and what the best balance is. And that becomes part of your main job, is sorting out what is the best balance of music and sound effects. And in Roma, I don't really, honestly, I don't know why. I think at a certain point, Alfonso may have just said, okay, well, let's just do everything differently, and anything that we can change up, let's change it up. And so let's not give the audience the opportunity to sort of sit back and listen to the score. Let's make them sit on the edge of their seat and crane to hear every sound effect and word, and let's not let the music interrupt that. That's probably part of it. I think the period aspect of it may also be part of it, where it would be hard to have a modern score address that time period in Mexico City, I think. But I think there's also there's an underlying aspect to film music, and that is that it is not part of the diegetic, as they say. It's not attached to the image. In most cases, we present the symphonic score across the front of the theater and into the surrounds, and in Atmos, it may go in Atmos as well. I'm thinking of the Hunger Games movies that I did, where James Newton Howard, the composer, asked me to have a fairly lame mix of the music in that it wouldn't be moving. And this is the way music is quite often presented in films, where it's kind of in the upper deck up there where the organ is in the church, and it's just up there quietly helping everyone, the parishioners, understand what's happening in the movie. And I think that we have this heritage where the movie is like a third person. So it's not the film, it's not the audience, but it's this other kind of guiding hand. And I suspect that Alfonso wished that for the audience not to have a guiding hand, and to let the audience really sort of boldly figure it out for themselves, what's happening in the movie and what's important in the film, what's not, and what's romantic and what's dark, etc. The things that the music usually helps the audience, gently nudges the audience in one direction or another. In No Country for Old Men, there was kind of a war between the two brothers about music, and Joel had insisted that there wouldn't be any score. There are a couple of, as they say, diegetic bits of music that are in bars, or there's a mariachi band, etc. And we were at the spotting session, as we always do. Me and Carter go, we watch the movie with the boys, and Ethan was kind of uncomfortably walking around, and I could tell that we were going to get to this at some point. And Joel said to Carter, what do you think? And Carter said, well, it would be hard to imagine what I could add to this mess that you have here. It's all so realistic. I don't know what we would do. And Ethan got even more agitated, and finally Ethan said, well, don't you think we should try some stuff? What do you think? And Joel and Ethan were kind of had a silent meeting, a Vulcan mind meld, I guess, and Joel said, okay, all right, okay. Carter, you can do music, but it has to enter on the wind, be indistinguishable from the wind, and leave the way it came in. And Carter said, okay. So I think there are 8 minutes of music in the film. There are 6 cues, I think, and one of them is quite actually relatively bold. I don't know if you recall at the end when Tommy Lee Jones goes to the motel and he can't decide whether to open the door or not. I think the cue there is just gorgeous and fantastic. And of course, there's a fantastic tail crawl cue, which is really a beautiful piece of music. Anyway, just so you know, but there are many films that have been done. The Birds, for instance, Alfred Hitchcock's movie is a notorious action movie with no music.
So it can be done. Not that we're anti-music. Of course we're not anti-music. You also do documentary films in addition to narrative films. You've worked with Errol Morris before and Davis Guggenheim. Is the approach to storytelling with sound any different when you're working on a nonfiction film as when you're working on a narrative film?
I would say yes. In general, well, at least with those two characters, they each have a little kind of edge about sound. Davis and his editor team that he usually works with have an obsession for chopping, mismatching dialogue together, which is super irritating to me. It makes it, to me, it's like a slap in the face almost. But they insist that reminds the audience that it's real, and that life is not smooth and continuous, and that life is, in a documentary sense, you're grabbing these pieces and they get slammed together, and it's just like, this is a weird thing that they do, and I fix some of them and they go okay, and then other things you can't fix, and some things we battle over, and eventually I give in. But anyway, that's a completely aside. I guess you could say there's probably more voiceover and more kind of drifty music in each of those movies. Certainly Inconvenient Truth had a lot of voiceover and music. But Errol's thing is more, Errol, he likes to basically have his track and his music, and then we tend to put a bunch of weird stuff around that, like almost like window dressing, like Christmas decorations. And he really enjoys that. It's kind of abstract and cool, but oftentimes it's hard to figure out. Like one time he called me about, his editor called me about The Unknown Known, which is the Donald Rumsfeld documentary, and said, well, we need to have some really fun stuff like you always give us, and would you mind giving that to me tomorrow, because we're trying to make a screening track for Sundance. I'm like, tomorrow? You mean like not today, but tomorrow? Yeah, so I cranked out a bunch of stuff, and it was a 2-hour film, so I just made one batch of funny stuff, as they call it, and I just copy and pasted throughout the whole thing, and I just rearranged stuff completely randomly, and I crashed that down. It took me about all day, really, basically, and I sent that to them, and they were like, they were shocked, really. I was kind of shocked myself. I could crank out that much sound having nothing to do with anything in one day. And that stuff all stuck. It's all in there. And we actually used it on the one we just did too, Wormwood. That stuff found its way back in there also. It's a different approach, for sure. And it's, and mostly documentaries have much less money and time. So that sets kind of a boundary. So,
yeah. In addition to your work with the Coens and with Alfonso, you also mix and sound supervise for a lot of young first-time directors. You did Lady Bird recently. What's your approach to working with a first-time director who may not necessarily be able to vocalize what it is that they are looking for in their sound work? How do you kind of navigate through that?
Well, it's pretty challenging for a first-time filmmaker to have a bunch of us and a stage working on their film and making a soundtrack and kind of hanging on for the ride and getting hooked up with the momentum of it, because there's a lot of stuff that we do. There's a lot of parts and people involved, and it can feel like kind of like a juggernaut, or maybe a bus out of control. I did one recently, which is called Booksmart, and the director is the actor Olivia Wilde, and they're all behind me. The backfield they're all back there, and they're all saying, too much, not enough. I don't know. What do you think? And at one point, Olivia just kind of got up and came over and sat next to me and said, I just think, I'm not really sure, but maybe that thing is... I'm like, okay, here's the thing. You're the filmmaker, we're the workers. You come over here and say to us, what you just did sucks. Redo that. Okay, I'll stand here while you fiddle around and get it right. Okay, that's the way you do it. That's the way everyone does it. You don't have to be nice. Just like, let it hang out. This might be something new you've never tried. It could be fun. You might like it. But really just like, let it rip. The same thing with Jonah Hill on mid-90s.
This was Jonah's first film,
His
right?
first film.
Yeah.
And he would say, gee, I don't know. And he was very, nervous. And I don't know. It's weird. Someone who's worked on one film is talking to someone who's worked on 200 films. And there's obviously, they don't have the language. That's the real problem, is they don't know to say, make that louder. That's all you need to say. Nothing else is required. That thing that you just did is lame. Can you just do that again and do better job of it? That's also good too. That works. I was working with Chris Rock on not his first film, a movie called Top 5, and he was having a bad day. That whole film was a bad day for him. I love the film, and he's fantastic. And he was standing next to me, and he's just, well, it's Chris Rock. Okay, cool. And he's like looking at me. And I look up at him and I go, what? And he goes, oh, no, it's good. I see what you're doing. It's all good. It's really good. It's just that when this is over, I hope I never see you ever again. And I'm like, oh, wow, it's that bad, huh? And so he was having a really bad day. And okay, the basic problem is that Chris has really bad stage fright. So his career as a performer is really hindered, or maybe even over. And so he thought filmmaking would be like a nice next career. But that movie was so horrible, he was like, nope, I'd rather be stage fright than this.
Than ever makes a movie with
Ever
you
make
ever
a movie
again.
Obviously, that's an exaggeration of the normal day.
Well, I could listen to you talk smack about film directors all day long. But I want to talk about Roma. So we have this. We have a clip that I want to show, which is I presume most everyone's seen Roma, right? Please say yes, because we're about to show a scene.
Okay, hang on. Show of hands. Who saw it in a theater?
Okay, good.
Oh, diehard fans.
Good.
Okay, and then everyone else, who saw it anywhere? Netflix, theater, anywhere. Okay.
Well, we're about to show a scene from the end of the film, and if you haven't seen the film, I can't help you. It's been up for several months now.
We can't set this up.
Yeah,
the whole movie sets up this scene, so you're just going to have to go with it.
But one of the reasons I want to show this. So this is the sort of the ending scene at the beach with Cleo and the kids in the water. And one of the reasons I want to show this is because I think people, even if they've worked in Atmos before, have a hard time understanding how detailed the mix on this was and how much stuff was going on. So we're actually going to show you that scene with the visualization of the Atmos RMU with the renderer. So can you set this up and just talk a little bit about like visually what they're going to see and objects? Like we should also just explain for those who don't know, Atmos, the Dolby Atmos system allows filmmakers for the first time to really think of each individual sound as an object that they can place in the 3D space of the box of the theater. So what you're about to see is a visual representation of that in this particular scene.
So you'll see the image. Will be above. You'll see the beach scene, and you'll see the action, and you'll hear. Here we go.
So we're gonna step out and let you guys see the scene. But so the scene is up here. So I should say, yeah. Let's just do this. Let's get out of the way and do this. This box on the left is a 3D representation of the cinema, and you can actually see the image up there. And so each one of these yellow dots represents an audio object. Do you want to say anything more, Skip?
Oh, so you'll see this volume graph or this meter, basically. That's an overall meter, which is basically what's happening in the room in the Atmos mix. And these dots represents an object. And in this case, the object itself is a mix of a bunch of individual sounds. So this is the 3D representation of the theater with the screen in the front. And so when these are moving around, they're basically hitting the speakers in the theater, which they're along the side and up on the ceiling. So you'll see how busy the scene got to be.
And obviously, you're listening to. We've set up this 5.1 monitoring system. We're not hearing this in Atmos up here tonight, but you'll get a sense of just the extraordinary amount of work that went into building this particular sequence. Before we open up for questions, the other thing that I just found astonishing, which I didn't realize until I heard Alfonso speak, was his process for making this film. He shot it in sequence which meant that he was working with largely non-professional actors. The only professional actor in the entire film was the woman who's playing the mother. Yalitza, who got nominated for Best Actress for playing Cleo. It's her first film. She's a non-professional actor. So he shot the movie in sequence. He didn't give anybody the script. None of the actors saw the script. They would just get the pages for the stuff that they were shooting on the day. And if those of you who've seen the film, that unbelievable, that just incredible childbirth sequence, Yalitza didn't know what was going to happen.
She didn't know the baby was dead. Born.
Well, I wasn't going to give away the spoiler, but Skip did.
Sorry.
And what you saw in the film was take one.
Take one. There was like a 10-minute crying session after that, and nothing ever equaled to take one. Well, because then everyone knew, of course, Yalitza. But she was very good, and it was, I don't know, I'm not a filmmaker, but I don't know why Alfonso had decided not to reveal the script, but I suspect, in hearing him talk about it, that it allowed the actors to not get hung up in process, and particularly Marina, who plays the mother, who's a very experienced actor, to not go to that sort of normal place and to not think, okay, we're doing another take, I must be doing something wrong. So let me do it differently, let me shade it differently. And it took a while for Marina to adjust to that. But everyone else, the kids in particular, were totally fine. Okay, do it again, sounds fun. And it is, like there are some scenes in the movie, like there's one scene in particular which they call the 380 because it goes all the way around plus a little bit. That's like 4 minutes long. And they did, the take that's in the movie is a composite of take 63 and 65. So it took them like 4 days to shoot that scene.
So you're talking about, this is the scene that starts outside with the hail, the kids are playing in the hail, and then you come inside, and there's that whole and then Cleo, that's the scene where Cleo tells the mother that she's pregnant. And that was a 4-minute sequence that they shot for 4 days. Unbelievable.
Well, they changed a lot. I was talking to Alfonso, I was working on the scene, and I was talking to him about one section, and I said, well, so this is different here. This was like improv, right? And he goes, how did you know that? And I said, well, I can tell just by the way the mom reacts. He said, yes, that's absolutely right. And apparently they did a lot of stuff, like change things up subtly to keep the kids, it was mostly for the kids, but in this one particular take, the take that's in the movie, he tells the older boy, Tonio, go and take all the paper and just walk out the frame, which is not the way they had done the previous 64 takes. So he grabs the paper and he exits out and he says a line as he's exiting, and the mom was like, whoa, you know, and you see her reaction, and it's strange because it's like not normal. It's not like a normal reaction, but it's like a remarkable reaction. And then she immediately gets with it, thinks, what am I going to do? And she knows what her line is, so she says her line, and then another thing happens, and she gets really angry, and then she thinks about it for a minute, and then she calms down, and she goes, okay, it's all right, it's okay. And that little transaction there to me, was really fortified and much more kind of real than some other parts of the same scene. So it was sort of it called out to me in a way. And Alfonso said, yeah, how can you tell that? How would you know that? And very disappointed in that I could figure it out. I said, well, don't forget, I've been looking at this scene for 2 days here. And I get it, you know, I can notice like really big details like that after a 2-day period. Okay, all right, I'll let you go this time, he said. But there really is, if you think about it, most of the people in the film are not actors. And they don't know the process. They have no problem with coming to work and saying, oh, today we're going to do a different scene, and these are my pages, and here's my sentence, paragraph, 2 pages, whatever. Okay, let's start. And as they went, they would make adjustments. Okay, you say that when you get there, and then we'll do it again, and why not? And I mean, I think it worked for him. Here's another question, number 4 for Alfonso, wherever you are. Why did you not reveal the script to the actors? I don't know the answer. Sorry, I'll get back to you if I ever see him again.
Let's open up and take some questions. Somebody said, do we have some microphones for the... We do have a couple microphones. And I saw a hand shoot up over here. You get to go first. Mary's bringing you a microphone.
Hello. I'm wondering if you could talk about the process of craft from your perspective, and particularly the way directors and editors can impact that for better or worse, like things that directors or editors will do that can be helpful or maybe not quite as helpful as you go through your process.
You want some tequila before you answer this?
I like filmmakers, so I feel like whatever they want to get up to, I'm okay with. And it is sometimes, it's hard when you're fighting during the mix about using a tip effect or something that we may have fashioned, which we think is much better. But it's a whole process, and the filmmakers and the editors do stuff like that to get through the day. We know that, and we need to embrace that and help them know that it's okay to do anything to their movie to get past the screenings and the previews and all the shit that we have to do. And if they're unwise enough to make a bad choice during the final mix, well, then it's their movie. What can you do? And I honestly, I really try to do whatever I can to facilitate. I don't care where it comes from. Copy that off the temp, take it from the Avid, whatever makes the filmmaker happy, or even the editor in this case, whatever it takes to make the movie good and whole, I'm for. And I wouldn't discourage any filmmakers, editors, or anyone from doing that kind of stuff. Temp scores, recording music, anything that makes them get to their happy place, I think is fair.
Next question. Right here. Yeah.
Hi, Skip.
Hey.
Congratulations on your nomination, too, for the show.
Thank you. We didn't win. Sorry.
I know, but we were voting for you if I could have voted. I've known Craig Hennigan for a long time. I knew him as a kid when he was starting out in Toronto and sound, so it's a really nice story to see him get to the Oscars like that. My question for you is, you mentioned you mixed in England, then you finished in LA. I presume there were full-size, large sound stages that you were working on. Did you then have to do a near-field mix of the film for Netflix? And also, I'm just wondering, when you went into this, like the 7.1 or the 5.1 or even the stereo full-downs, did you have to make any adjustments at all to your Atmos mix?
Yes, to all of those. We made dozens of mix downs for Netflix, and everything, we mixed natively, which Craig and I both prefer. So we made the Atmos mix first. And as everyone knows, the Atmos mix is based on a 7.1 sort of base of sounds and the stuff that isn't as busy. And so you can use the RMU to make fold downs and crash downs. If you don't have much time, it's a very fast way to get a mix going, and they can just grab things that need to be adjusted. In my experience, there's always some things that are hanging out there that need to be fixed, adjusted, repanned a bit. Craig, unfortunately, was stuck with he spent about 6 weeks doing crash downs of various kinds. And a lot of it was about Netflix's changing views of the film and the way it played. And they also had changing delivery requirements during our particular process. And at some point during the mix, the head of Netflix announced that he was very excited about people watching Roma on their cell phones. So the cell phone mix got to be real important one day. So
You did an earbud mix for
yeah, sort of. So, but there were a lot of versions and a lot of things happened, and it took a long time. And there was an undying patience and resources to do the best versions we could do of every version. And as many filmmakers eventually will be confronted with having worked in an Atmos mix, and then knowing with a certain knowledge that most people are not going to see that mix, they're going to see some other version. And then if you add Netflix to that, that means that most people are going to see the movie at home on their TV. So the home version got to be very important. We made 2 or 3 versions of that. Sure.
Was there greater changes made by Netflix?
No. No, this was an acquisition. It wasn't produced by Netflix. And one thing about the movie that I think is worth noting, within the Steven Spielberg of it all, the idea that Netflix is the enemy is, in my opinion, somewhat short-sighted. I would just say 2 things about that. One is that other filmmakers, other than Steven Spielberg, used to make movies in the $5 million to $50 million range. And the studios used to really kind of enjoy those, what they called low-budget movies. Steven Spielberg hasn't worked on very many of those movies since his days, probably since Duel is the last time he had that little money to make a movie. That was his first film. So it was a TV film, that's right. It wouldn't have been eligible for an Oscar. So unfortunately for everyone, the studios stopped making those movies about 10 years ago. And all of the small studios, like the ones that produced many of the films that I worked on, USA Network and Focus and Good Machine and all these other small, Cinecom, they went out of business because the major studios wouldn't distribute their films. So whether Spielberg likes it or Mr. Spielberg likes it or not, Netflix and many of the other streaming services are making all of those films and series, and aspiring filmmakers now have a place where they can actually make these types of projects. So that's point 1. Point 2 is much more simple. Many, many, many more people saw Roma because it was available on Netflix than would ever have seen if the film was only released in theaters.
And I, for my own selfish purposes, I will point out that Netflix streams Roma and many movies in Dolby Vision and Dolby Atmos. So there's now a new generation of televisions that's coming out with Atmos built in. They have little tiny speakers on top that upfire and reflect off the ceiling. And this work that you do on the Atmos mix for this spectacular theatrical experience, part of what we try to do at Dolby is to make sure that that experience is as good as it can possibly be at every different point that the audience gets to experience the film, even if it's on a phone. So is it the theatrical experience? Of course it's not, but we can do what we can to make sure that the experience is as good as it can possibly be. Other questions, please.
Hello. Thanks for the very interesting conversation. Since you two just talking about the sound design and the film scoring, like sometimes there's no film scoring, give more space for sound design, but there are also score made for the purpose or with a concept as part of sound design. So how do you personally consider the boundary between sound design kind of film scoring and sound design itself, and also the boundary between the role for the composer and the sound designer, when the composer also doing kind of sound design scoring?
Well, like I say, I'm all in favor of anything that makes the film better and the filmmakers happy. And I do really like music, and I think I worked on a couple of movies that are exactly as you described, where the music is working like sound design, and at least integrally related to the sound effects that are happening. Like, for instance, Barton Fink, Carter and Birdwell and I worked together very closely, and we engineered a track that had space for both people to have their best their happiest times together without invading the other person. And I think that track is really remarkable because the sound effects and the music do play really nicely with each other. And so we did that in advance. I gave Carter things that we were going to do, and he gave us his demos of the score. And so we really doped it out, both in terms of the type of sounds and the frequencies. But I think it's also, Gravity is also a good example of sound effects and music working together nicely. But it's an unusual association. Alfonso really likes rules. He likes to approach things scientifically, and Gravity has a lot of rules because in space there's no sound, so because there's no air, so there's no possibility for sound. And a lot of the things that are in the movie are scientifically accurate. Like, for instance, if you're in a spacesuit, which we are in about half the movie, the suit has air in it. So if you touch something, that the sound is transmitted through vibrations through the air in the suit, so you can actually hear things that you're touching. But if right next to you something blows up, there's no air to transmit the vibrations, so you wouldn't even feel it. It's just like it didn't happen. And that was like completely dissatisfying when it came to the movie. It was just a total bad idea. So we had a lot of sound effects, which we tried to slip in, and we would put them in and test them and see what we could get away with. But the real answer, which was really genius on Alfonso and Stephen Price, the composer, on their part, they had this idea that the music would be non-orchestra sounds. So a lot of the music came from acoustic instruments, but everything was processed to the point where it became kind of closer to noise and less like symphony. And so what Stephen did is that he made a lot of components. So the score came to us on the stage as multiple stems, and there were usually around 10 different stems. And they were fairly consistent throughout the whole score, throughout the whole movie, but they had, because they weren't orchestra instruments, they all had weird names. And what we did was we took this piece of gear, which I had never used before, called Spanner, and it's a panning plug-in which allows you to do two things which were really important for us. One is a steering wheel, so you could take a 5-1 mix and you could rotate the mix like this, and it would stay in its relative balance. So you could take a stem, and you could take the main components from the front and pan them around the side, around the back, or a 360, and they would stay as one unit, one cohesive thing. And the other thing you could do, which is kind of great, was do this flop, where you could pan the things from the front through the Atmos speakers to the back, and then the stuff from the back would go underground somehow and end up in the front. I wished for speakers.
Next iteration of Atmos, we'll put speakers on the floor.
2.0. So anyway, so that leads you to, in the sequences in Gravity where stuff is really moving, we would find a component in the score and we would attach it to the sound, like you would with like a Death Star engine sound. So as something goes flying through the screen, we would take a musical component and track the object with that. And that became like a really satisfying substitute, which was confusing, usually in a good way, to us and to the audience. And so we kind of broke our own rules and stomped on their grave, and then had a wonderful time just making a big sort of mess out of the whole thing. And the more we refined that, and the more we sort of ID'd things that were too much or not really working and refined it, we got to be very happy. By the way, that mix only took 10 days instead of 70.
But you said something earlier that I thought was fantastic, and it's astonishing to me that more people don't do this. You were talking about No Country. You said Carter Burwell came in with you, and you did Despotic Session together, which I know that you guys do on all the Coen Brothers films. Despotic Session is both you and Carter. It's astonishing to me that more directors don't have one spotting session for sound effects and music, that they separate that. They kind of set up a competition between the two groups.
Well, I think the secret there lies in the fact that most directors don't spot for sound effects. It's quite rare. I mean, we get orders for stuff, or usually we're told to prepare for some event, and we work on a sequence, and that becomes the sort of test ground for what we're doing and what our sounds are adequate or not. And we get all the feedback from those mixes and screenings, and we don't have formal. I mean, they don't even tell us what they want. They just say, here you go, kid. Good luck. Whereas they do spot and they do temp music, and a lot of times composers still invite the filmmakers over to their house, and they run the movie and they sit at the piano and they play. I've never been to a session like that, but apparently it's quite magical to be sitting with a very famous composer who's just playing a score and saying, yeah, this is going to be, I'm going to have a lot of double basses in here, or something. I don't know what they do, but anyway, it's quite precious, apparently, to filmmakers to have that event. So we don't have a corresponding, what would it be? In-N-Out Burger?
That's great. We have time for one more question before we start drinking wine again. So one last question, anyone? I see you in the back there, yeah.
Hey, Skip. Congrats. How far along?
Thank you.
How far along were the visual effects when you started doing like that scene outside the theater? Because I mean, there were buses dropped in, there were people all along. A lot of times we get shows to work on that. And visual effects are, they're flying in at the mix. So we finally got a render of it. On Roma, how far along were you when you started doing those sequences?
Well, you should know that the color process, which was kind of a simultaneous visual effects and DI process, was 18 weeks. And that the HDR vision pass alone was 8 weeks. So they were when I first started working on the film, they were already into their beginning of their DI pass. So we had pretty much everything. Actually, I'm trying to remember, there were so few things where we didn't have a complete picture. I can't really recall anything that was even like a green screen or, well, a gray screen, I guess it would be. Everything was pretty much there. There was a lot of picture changes during the process, and particularly the beginning of the movie evolved based on the credits and the number of them and the placement. And that was kind of a dreaded area because we had to actually work it out with Alfonso, and he was very uptight about the whole thing. And I guess because of the whole thing with the Cannes Film Festival and Netflix being involved, and they didn't want us to know that Netflix was going to be involved because it was kind of a secret. And that was one of the things that we actually worked out over a period of a couple of days on the stage. The actual footsteps, where she came down, how many times she poured the water on the floor, and there was a big visual effect on that scene, which was not done. That was one of the few things that wasn't done when we worked on the film. We started working on the film, which I can't explain to you. It's too complicated. But anyway, the answer is everything was there. There were no surprises, really.
But that's pretty rare. I'm sure on Gravity you were working with not final visual effects quite on a lot of it.
Gravity was, there was a huge change that was made right before I started. In fact, people got fired, and I took their place. And the movie was edited, and the release date was moved a year, and there was a new storyline that was created, to get around this editing chunk. And there were actually paintings, drawings that were just like frames. It's like Sandra Bullock is the frame, and then all this dialogue. That was interesting.
You got to use your imagination, right?
Yeah.
Well, that's all the time that we have. Skip Lievsay, thank you so much. It's been fun.
Thank you. Thank you.